I thought a quiet midday workout at the gym would be my best chance to avoid embarrassing myself in front of strangers. But when I stepped in, I quickly realized it would be anything but ordinary. With only one other person there, Mandingo, a towering, chiseled stranger, I was about to experience a workout unlike any other, one that would push me beyond my limits in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was the middle of the day and the gym was almost eerily quiet. I'd thought going at this hour would save me from embarrassing myself in front of a crowd, but I hadn't expected it to be completely empty. The only people there were the owner, busy behind the desk, and one other person working out near the weights rack. I caught sight of him the moment I walked in. He was hard to miss. Tall, easily 6 feet 3 inches or more, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that looked like it could bench press the whole building. He had deep brown skin, warm and smooth, that caught the light and made every muscle definition stand out. My eyes trailed down to his biceps, which looked sculpted enough to belong in an art museum, before catching myself and glancing away, hoping he hadn't noticed. As I fumbled with my bag and my water bottle, I felt his gaze. I looked up, and he was watching me with a slight, knowing smile. He nodded, stepping forward, and in a smooth, deep voice, he introduced himself. "Mandingo," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm but warm, and I couldn't help but notice how his hand practically engulfed mine. "Tasha," I managed, trying to sound casual. My mind was racing, still absorbing the details of his presence, his height, the way his shoulders seemed to fill the space around him, and his confident, relaxed demeanor. "Need a hand with anything?" he asked, motioning to the equipment. I nodded, trying to keep cool. "Actually, yes. I could use some pointers." I didn't mention that I hadn't set foot in a gym in ages. We started off with some basic exercises, and he guided me through the motions with a calm, easy authority that made it all seem so natural. His attention was focused and undivided, his gaze occasionally sliding over me with a kind of quiet appraisal that I couldn't ignore. Just as I was starting to relax into the rhythm of the workout, the owner called out to us. "Hey, Mandingo. Emergency call. Gotta lock up for a bit. You two can stay if you don't mind the place to yourselves. Just lock up when you're done." I blinked, glancing at Mandingo, but he didn't seem the least bit fazed. He gave the owner a thumbs up, and just like that, it was only the two of us in the gym. Somehow, that made the space feel smaller, more intimate. As I went through each rep, I couldn't help stealing glances at him. My gaze traced over his strong jawline, his broad chest, and the way his muscles flexed with each slight movement. And more than once, I noticed his eyes following my every move, a silent exchange that left me feeling warmer than the exercise ever could. After a while, Mandingo raised an eyebrow, smirking a little. "You ready for something different?" I hesitated, but the look in his eyes was both challenging and intriguing. "Sure. I'm open to trying new things." He led me to a mat and demonstrated a stretch, his long arms reaching up, muscles stretching in ways I didn't think possible. He showed me a few moves, each one seeming to test my flexibility, but I could tell by the amused expression on his face that he was enjoying putting me through these unique positions. "All right," he said, folding his arms as he watched me attempt a low lunge. "Not bad, but let's see if you can go a little deeper into that stretch." I tried, aware of the way his gaze traveled over me, watching every shift and movement, as if he were taking mental notes. He stepped in to adjust my form, his hands guiding my arms and hips, his touch both firm and gentle. The closeness made my heart race, and I wondered if he could hear it pounding. "You're doing good," he murmured, his voice low. "Real good. Just keep breathing." After the stretches, Mandingo gestured toward the weight bench, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "Let's see what you've got," he said, patting the bench. "Go ahead and lie down. I'll guide you through it." I took a deep breath and settled onto the bench, feeling the coolness of the leather against my back. He stood above me, positioning himself just behind the bar, ready to spot me. His towering frame filled my vision, and as I looked up, it was impossible not to notice the details, his strong stance, his focused expression, and, given the angle, his powerful build, right at eye level. I swallowed, doing my best to keep my gaze steady, but my eyes lingered, caught in the moment. "Take it slow," he murmured, his voice a deep rumble. "Let me know if you need a hand." I gripped the bar, trying to steady myself. The weight was manageable, but having him so close made me hyper-aware of every movement. Each time I lifted the bar and lowered it, my gaze drifted back up, catching glimpses of his stance. He was focused, attentive, his hands hovering just above mine, ready to assist if I needed it. "Doing great," he said, his voice steady, with a hint of something warm beneath it. Just as I thought we'd moved on to more traditional exercises, Mandingo flashed me a playful grin. "All right," he said, with that mischievous glint in his eye. "How do you feel about a challenge?" Before I could ask what he meant, he stepped closer and wrapped his arms around my waist, lifting me up as if I weighed no more than one of the dumbbells. My gasp turned into a laugh as he shifted me with ease, positioning me so my legs rested against his broad shoulders. "Mandingo, I don't think this is a standard workout move," I said, feeling my cheeks warm. "Hey, you're always welcome to mix things up a little," he replied, his smile widening. "Flexibility and strength, two very important components of fitness, don't you think?" With that, he started doing squats, holding me effortlessly. Each movement was fluid, steady, as if he'd done this 100 times before. From my elevated position, my gaze occasionally wandered downward, catching him looking back up at me with that same amused expression every time I sneaked a peek. He shifted again, this time carrying me in a way that reminded me of playing Twister. Only now, there was a very different energy in the air. We moved, changed positions, each one more creative and elaborate than the last, his hands steady as they guided me. At one point, he leaned in, his face inches from mine, his gaze holding a playful intensity. "You're surprisingly good at this," I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady. "And you're surprisingly flexible," he replied, holding my gaze as his smile deepened. As the workouts continued, I found myself fully caught up in Mandingo's rhythm and movements. He lifted and maneuvered me effortlessly, as if this unusual routine was the most natural thing in the world. With each shift, each change of position, I felt his strength and the steady warmth radiating from him. Our bodies close, moving in sync. We were both glistening with sweat by this point, the room warm and quiet, and the focus between us was sharp. The only sounds were our breaths and the faint squeak of sneakers on the gym floor. At some point, I realized I was no longer thinking about the workout, or the gym, or anything else. I was completely aware of every place we were touching, how the warmth from his skin seemed to mix with mine. It felt like we were moving as one, each position fluid, natural, bringing us closer without a single gap between us. My skin tingled each time our bodies brushed together, the thin barrier of our gym clothes somehow amplifying the sensation. I glanced up, finding his gaze already fixed on me, a small, knowing smile on his lips. "Didn't think working out would feel like this," I managed, my voice softer than I intended. His eyes held mine, and he gave a slight nod. "Sometimes, it's about finding the right partner," he murmured. As Mandingo leaned in, his proximity and warm breath sent a shiver down my spine. He spoke, his low tone making me listen intently. "It's sweltering in here, isn't it?" He reached for the hem of his shirt and, in one smooth motion, whipped it over his head, revealing his chiseled torso. Sweat had beaded on his dark skin, making him look like a statue carved from living ebony. My eyes widened as he continued to undress, slowly peeling off his gym shorts. They hit the floor with a soft thud, leaving him bare before me. I'd never seen anything like it. His body was even more magnificent than I had imagined, every muscle defined, each curve and contour seemingly carved by the gods themselves. I felt the air leave my lungs as I gazed upon Mandingo's magnificent body, naked and gleaming with sweat in the dim gym lights. It was as if I'd been possessed, my very soul drawn to his raw, primal power. My eyes roamed over every inch of him, drinking in the sight of his taut muscles, the thick veins corded under smooth, dark skin. In a daze, I reached for the hem of my shirt and slowly pulled it up over my head, revealing my own bare skin. I felt a thrill of exposing myself so completely, a sense of abandon I'd never known before. The weight of Mandingo's gaze on my exposed body sent a shiver down my spine, yet I stood my ground, almost mesmerized by the raw masculinity before me. His dark, sculpted form seemed otherworldly, making me feel small and insignificant in comparison. As I let my pants pull at my feet, I caught a glimpse of his tool. Its sheer size had me instinctively clenching, a spark of nervousness igniting within me. It was intimidating, but I didn't let fear take hold. Instead, I felt an inexplicable pull, as if drawn to the heat emanating from him. Mandingo's hands wrapped around my waist, his touch firm and reassuring as he lifted me onto the weight bench. I was wrapping my shaking legs around his waist as he positioned himself between my parted thighs. I closed my eyes, a mix of apprehension and something else fluttering in my chest. When I opened them again, Mandingo was watching me with a look that set my pulse racing. He leaned in, his breath hot against my skin as he whispered, "Trust me, Tasha. Just let go." His words seemed to melt through my reservations, leaving me pliant, open to whatever he had in store. We start with the same precarious low lunge he'd shown me before, but this time, with his body pressed flush against mine. I felt every ripple of muscle, every bead of sweat, searing into my back as my chest pressed against the hard planes of his abdomen. He grunted softly, shifting, and I realized he was positioning himself between my spread thighs. The sensation of his heat against my core made me gasp, a jolt of pleasure shooting through me. Mandingo glanced up, catching me staring, and gave me a wicked grin. His thumbs brushed over delicate details, sending fire racing down to my very core. I bit my lip, torn between embarrassment and arousal. He began moving, shift after shift, each one more complex and heated than the last. I felt like a ragdoll, too caught up in sensation to bother with thought or control. His sweat-slick skin slid against mine, every touch electrifying, stoking the flames higher. Mandingo held me up with a hand under my knee, angling me in a way that brought our hips flush. I felt the outline of his arousal along the curve of my body, the promise of what was to come. A soft scream escaped me at the intimate contact, echoing in the quiet gym. He started to move then, drawing out a slow rhythm. Each stroke was a delicious friction, each withdrawal leaving me aching for more. I tangled my fingers in his hair, holding him to me as I lost myself in the feeling. It wasn't long before my leg began to tremble, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The heat between us built to a fever pitch, impossible to ignore. I knew I was on the verge, teetering on the brink of a precipice I'd never known. Mandingo's thrusts grew more forceful, hitting that deep, throbbing spot inside me with each stroke. My body strained toward the peak, a coil of tension coiling tighter with every touch. Suddenly, Mandingo increased the tempo with a primal intensity. Stars burst behind my eyelids as the tension snapped, releasing in a wave of pure, white-hot bliss. My inner walls clamped down on him as I cried out his name. Through it all, Mandingo remained relentless, his own release building. His breathing grew harsh, his hips pistoning into mine with increasing desperation. I felt him swell inside. With a guttural moan, Mandingo finally reached his climax as he emptied himself inside me. Heat spread through my core, the sensation sending shivers down my spine. I clung to him, gasping for air. For a long moment, we remained still, bodies entwined, hearts racing in tandem. The weight of his arms around me, the shielding of his chest against my back, the hard length of him still seated deep within. Every sensation was overwhelmingly exquisite. Afterwards, Mandingo let out a contented sigh, his body still pressed flush against mine. But just as I thought our encounter was coming to a close, he spoke in a low, husky tone that sent a familiar thrill through my veins. "Not finished yet," he murmured, his warm breath tickling my ear. Before I could ask what he meant, Mandingo's hold on me shifted. He grasped my hips, pulling me off the bench. I gasped as he spun us around, my back to his chest. His body molded against mine, a solid wall of heat. Oh, I breathed, a mix of surprise and anticipation coursing through me. Mandingo's hands gripped my hips tighter as his hard length slid against my slick folds. I could feel the distinct outline of him, and the knowledge sent a shiver rippling down my spine. My mind raced, trying to process the sudden change, but it was futile. All coherent thought fled as Mandingo's teeth scraped over my earlobe, his hips undulating against mine in a slow, deliberate rhythm. You feel incredible like this," he purred, his hot breath fanning over my neck as he whispered in my ear. "So willing, so open to me." His words sent another jolt of desire coursing through my veins. I couldn't stop the needy scream that escaped my lips, or the way my hips instinctively rolled back, seeking more of his touch. Mandingo grinned against my neck, his teeth scraping lightly over my sensitive skin. "That's it, baby," he murmured, his hips picking up speed as he pushed deeper. "Take all of me." His words were a commanding growl, and I was helpless to resist. The sound of our slick, slapping skin filled the air, punctuated by my ragged breaths and his low, guttural grunts. Time seemed to warp, the only reality the intense, primal act connecting us. I was lost in the heat of the moment, my mind a haze of pleasure and need. Mandingo's hands tightened on my hips, his grip almost bruising as he pounded into me with unrestrained desire. I felt the stretch, felt fill me up so completely, the sensation almost overwhelming. Mandingo held still for a long moment. I was lost, exhilarated, my mind blanking out from the sheer. A low, high-pitched scream escaped my lips, a sound I'd never heard myself make before. It seemed to ignite something in Mandingo, and he began to move again, slower this time, taking me into oblivion. I was so lost in the moment, my vision blurring at the edges. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this consumed like this. With a final, animalistic grunt, he plunged deep and held still, his cock throbbing inside me. I felt his heat, the sensation sending me careening over the edge once more. It crashed over me like a tidal wave, my back arching as I screamed his name. For a timeless moment, our bodies remained entwined. I was breathless, my limbs trembling as I struggled to catch my breath. The world seemed to have narrowed down to the sensations pulsing through my oversensitized flesh. As our heart rates eventually synced, I became aware of the sounds around us, the muffled hum of the gym, the distant pounding of feet on treadmills. My gaze drifted to the mirrors lining the wall, where a stunned scene greeted me. The open gym was packed with women and men, all staring at us in wide-eyed shock. As Mandingo pulled out, I felt a strange sense of disorientation, my mind struggling to come back to the present. The sight of the crowd in the mirrors hit me like a slap. I felt like I was in a dream, my legs shaky as we stood there. The weight of the audience's stunned gazes settled heavily over us. I glanced. Mandingo's confidence was a balm to my frazzled nerves. I leaned into him, my gaze flicking over the rapt faces in the mirrors. Some looked horrified, others stunned, but beneath it all, I sensed the raw attraction crackling in the air. As if reading my thoughts, Mandingo's lips brushed against my ear. "Let them watch," he murmured, his breath sending shivers down my spine. His words echoed in my head as he led me to the locker room, his fingers interlaced with mine. It was a surreal procession, the respectful silence following us like a shroud. As the locker room door swung shut behind us, Mandingo's magnetic pull drew me closer. His body pressed hers to his, corded muscles flexing as his arms wrapped around her waist. "We're not done yet, Tasha," he growled, his lips grazing the shell of her ear. I knew how everyone outside the glass doors could witness our heated encounter. But nothing could stop me now. I was a woman possessed. It's so wrong, but I love it," I gasped as he set me down on the cold tile, bending me over the edge of the bench. He was potent and relentless. Our screams echoed off the tile walls as Mandingo pounded into me, his thrusts growing harder, more frenzied. I braced my hands against the cold bench, surrendering myself to him. At some point during that frenzied, passionate coupling in the gym locker room, I must have blacked out, lost all sense of time and space. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in a wheelchair, my body jostling on the hard rubber tires as Mandingo expertly pushed me through the gym's exit. A dull, throbbing ache pulsed through my body, a stark reminder of our intense, unforgettable encounter. Yet despite the pain, I couldn't deny the dark thrill lighting up my veins at the realization we weren't done. As Mandingo maneuvered the chair through the exit, his low murmur caressed my ear. "We're just getting started, baby." His words sent shivers down my spine, a primal hunger stoking to life within me. Sitting in the wheelchair as I rode the elevator down, I couldn't help but replay the events in my head. The gym had never felt so intimating. The workout had never been so exhilarating. When I exited, I knew I'd be back, pushing myself to the limits of pleasure and pain under Mandingo's guiding hand. And as much as my battered body ached, I craved more of his dominance, more of the intoxicating rush of surrender. As I left, every step was a reminder of the unforgettable experience I'd had. Somehow, I knew this was only the beginning.